Many ancient civilizations have been lost to time. There are those civilizations that are so well documented we can almost form a perfect picture of what day-to-day life was like for them, but others are more mysterious, with only a handful of artifacts and remnants of their architecture to go off of. These are the top 10 ancient lost civilizations that scientists finally discovered. At one time, the Vinca Civilization was one of the largest prehistoric cultures in Europe. They were around for about 1500 years, from about 5500 BCE to 4000 BC. They were in parts of what is now Serbia and Romania. The civilization is named after the village of Vinca and the Danube River, where some of the biggest archaeological discoveries were made in the 20th century. The Vinca people had advanced metalworking skills, especially when it came to copper. They excavated the earliest known mine in Europe, and they actually may have been the first civilization in the world to work with copper. These people didn't have a fully developed writing system, but archaeologists have found examples of proto-writing, symbols and marks that don't form a language necessarily, but may have been used as a kind of early form of communication. Their society was also quite organized. Their homes were carefully planned with designated areas for waste disposal. They've also found children's toys during excavations like animal figures and rattles. The Zapotec Civilization, ever heard of them? They're usually overshadowed by the more famous Aztecs and Maya, but they were one of the earliest cultures in Mesoamerica. They were pioneers when it came to agriculture and developed one of the first writing systems in the region. Their biggest city was Monte Alban, built around the 5th century BCE. It was around for around 1200 years and at its peak housed around 25,000 people. The ruling class was made up of priests, warriors, and artists overseeing the lower classes, and they subjugated nearby areas, assimilating them into their civilization. What caused their decline? It's not entirely clear. Monte Alban was mostly left intact when the civilization began to fade, so it doesn't seem like there was a catastrophic event that caused the downfall. Could have been economic trouble, which caused people to up and look for work in other places. Eventually, the remaining groups split up into other city-states, which started to compete against each other, which led to the end of their culture altogether. The Hittites. These were an ancient Anatolian civilization that came about around the 2nd millennium BCE in what is now modern-day Turkey. They formed a powerful empire, reaching their peak in the mid-14th century BCE under a king named Suppiluliuma I. At the time, they controlled a large territory that included much of Anatolia and parts of northern Syria. For centuries, the Hittites were only known about through references in other cultures, mainly because their civilization had collapsed by the end of the 12th century BCE. The remnants of their empire was lost to time, and it wasn't until the 19th century that physical evidence of them was rediscovered. In 1834, a French scholar by the name of Charles Texier found what would later be known as the Hittite ruins. At the time, he didn't recognize how significant they were. In the late 1800s, though, archaeological findings at sites like Coltepe revealed trade records mentioning the land of Hatti. Then in 1906, archaeologist Hugo Winkler uncovered over 10,000 clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, one of the oldest known forms of writing. And these tablets revealed tons of stuff about the Hittite Empire and how it was governed, their culture, and their language. The Nabateans were an Arab civilization that lived in northern Arabia and the southern Levant. Their most famous city, Petra, is in modern-day Jordan and was a major trading hub that connected a number of trade routes across the region. The Nabateans lived between the 4th and 2nd centuries BCE and built a kingdom centered around trade, becoming pretty wealthy and influential. They were very independent, able to fend off several attempts by empires including the Romans to control them, but in 106 CE, Emperor Trajan annexed their kingdom into the Roman Empire. The Nabateans still managed to preserve a large part of their culture though, which included finely crafted ceramics and very distinctive architecture, like the rock-cut buildings found in Petra. Their history dates back to at least 312 BCE, when they were first mentioned in battle reports. As they expanded, they gained control over key territories including Damascus. Petra became quite the city, home to around 20,000 people at its height. Over time, the Nabateans adopted Greek as the dominant language, and by the 5th century, many of them had converted to Christianity. The civilization's decline began with the rise of new Arab groups, and eventually, the Nabatean culture dissipated. The Clovis People. These were an ancient group that lived in North America around 13,000 years ago. They are known for their stone tools, especially their fluted projectile points called Clovis points. The Clovers were some of the earliest known human inhabitants in North America. In 1929, a 19-year-old named Ridgely Whiteman discovered a Clovis site near Blackwater Draw in New Mexico. The site contains stone tools along with the remains of mammoths, which was evidence that there was human activity during the Pleistocene era. Before this, another big discovery happened in 1927 at the Folsom site, where the remains of a now extinct bison species were found alongside human-made tools. This was the first definitive evidence of humans in the Americas during that period. Excavations at Blackwater Draw revealed thousands of artifacts over several years, confirming the existence of a culture that relied heavily on hunting large game like mammoths. The Clovis people were highly mobile hunter-gatherers, but their culture didn't last forever. As the megafauna began to dwindle, so did the way of life for the Clovis people. That, along with the extinction of mammoths, which they may have relied heavily on for food. Çatalhöyük is a Neolithic settlement in Turkey that dates back around 7500 BC. It was rediscovered in the late 50s by James Mallard, who found these layers of buildings. Excavations showed that the settlement consisted of tightly packed mud brick houses, and there were no streets. So how did the people get around? Well, they moved around on the rooftops. Suffice to say, the architecture is fascinating and incredibly unique. Houses were accessed through holes in the ceiling, and there were no clear public buildings. They also found a ton of artifacts, from everyday tools to murals depicting hunting scenes and even human figures. People also buried their dead underneath their homes, and I briefly mentioned this before, but another really cool thing about this society was that there were no grand buildings or signs of a ruling class at all. It seems like social status was relatively equal among everyone. The people at Çatalhöyük were also into agriculture, growing grains like wheat and barley, while also hunting and gathering. The Olmecs were one of the earliest and most influential civilizations in Mesoamerica. They started to form around 1400 to 1200 BCE, but more recent discoveries may push them back even further, to about 16 to 15 BCE, thanks to findings at a site called El Manati. The Olmecs are believed to have evolved from early farming cultures in the Tabasco region dating back as far as 5100 BCE. Their first major center was San Lorenzo. Tenochtitlan, the region's fertile land, and the Coatzacoalcos River helped support a pretty sizable population, leading to the rise of an elite class that demanded fancier goods. And the elites traded for materials like jade and obsidian found in far-off places, which means they had a trade network across Mesoamerica. As time went on, San Lorenzo eventually fell apart around 900 BCE. La Venta then took the spotlight. From 900 BCE until about 400 BCE, La Venta was home to the Great Pyramid, the Mesoamerican version, of course, the largest structure in Mesoamerica at the time, which still stands today. The Olmec civilization is most famous for their massive stone heads, believed to be portraits of their rulers. Each head is unique and is adorned with distinctive headdresses. The Khmer Empire was a powerful civilization in Southeast Asia that lasted from 802 CE to 1431, thereabouts. It stretched across present-day Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and parts of Vietnam. This empire was this blend of Buddhist and Hindu cultures, which came about after centuries of conflict. The Khmer are also best known for their incredible architecture, particularly the temples of Angkor, which are still some of the most impressive monuments in the world. And a lot of these structures are, thankfully, still in remarkably good condition to this day. But like a lot of great civilizations, the Khmer Empire eventually began to decline. As for why? Well, one possibility is that the migration of Thai people slowly encroached on Khmer territory, similar to how Germanic tribes moved into the Roman Empire. This gradual takeover may have weakened the Khmer's political influence over time. Others think that constant warfare is what did them in. Another theory is that there could have been changes in the climate that messed with their agriculture. If rainfall patterns changed, the Khmer might have struggled to maintain their farms, and mass amounts of people would have had to leave. The Nabta Playa people lived in southern Egypt around 6 to 11,000 years ago. They were primarily nomadic, moving around in search of food and water. Eventually, some members began to settle in the area, forming a more permanent civilization. As the climate started drying out, the region transformed into a desert, which would have sucked for them, but it did help preserve a lot of the artifacts that they left behind. One of the most famous things they left behind is the stone circle of Nabta Playa, which is the oldest known astronomical site on Earth. But along with marking the seasons, archaeologists have discovered animal remains in underground chambers, meaning that rituals may have taken place here as well. Like the other ancient civilizations on this list, the Nabta Playa people eventually disappeared. Climate change played a major role in their decline, pushing them to migrate and adapt elsewhere. And finally, the Minoan civilization lived on the Greek island of Crete from around 3000 to 1000 BC. They were a distinct culture recognized as the early ancestors of later ancient Greek society. The Minoans had pretty interesting religious lives, which included animal sacrifices, big festivals, and a number of cults celebrating nature and fertility. Egyptian hieroglyphs reference the Minoans, and from this we can determine they were active traders. They were also skilled in arts, coming up with beautiful pottery and intricate frescoes, but their civilization fell away, and one theory is that it was thanks to a volcanic eruption in the nearby Santorini Islands, which could have unleashed all these devastating tsunamis and ash clouds. Another theory comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who thought that plagues and diseases might have been the cause. But like most of the ancient civilizations on this list, we don't know exactly how they disappeared. With all that said though, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.